The death of suspected illegal miners at old mine shafts is all too common across our country. 39 bodies found over the past 24 hours, and 31, as we've just said, were found at a disused mine shaft in Welkom last night and 8 at a dump site in Germiston today. Let's discuss this further with lead researcher at the Benchmarks Foundation, David van Wyk. David, the Benchmarks Foundation looks extensively into mining in South Africa to measure business social responsibility performance. In this instance, where do you think the buck stops?
Well, I think that the buck stops with a combination of factors. One is we've got 6,000 abandoned mines. The Auditor General's report in February of 2022 clearly stipulated that the government had done very little over the last 20 years to actually deal with the issue. Mines are being abandoned as we speak. Mines refuse to share their mine closure plans with local government and so on. Mining is a national competence, and local government have got no control over the mines in the vicinity of where towns and communities live. They cannot stop licenses from being issued, and they cannot force mining companies to close their operations because it's a national competency. Mining companies simply ignore local and provincial government. So there's a discrepancy there in the law because the local authorities are the ones who sit with the mess, the environmental mess and the social mess that is caused by mines that are not properly closed. And Machabeng is a critical example of what is happening, where mining towns are turning into ghost towns. And when mines actually close, they don't just abandon the mine, they also abandon the mine workers. You know, there's a pension fund which has billions of rands that are not paid to mine workers because it's so impossible to get your pension out of that fund. It's just absolutely very difficult to do so. You have to have access to a computer, internet, emails, fax machines and things like that to be able to use it. If you're sitting in a village in Lesotho, you can't actually do that. You know, so many workers actually don't go home when a mine closed down and they are retrenched. They simply stay where they are and they continue doing what they've always been doing. In any case, there's no work in Lesotho because Lesotho has for the last 100 years been the supply of cheap labor for mine workers into South Africa. And so consequently, when they go back to Lesotho, there's no economy that ever developed there because that government depended on the remittances of mine workers to Lesotho. Same with Mozambique and so on. Lesotho and Mozambique are the two countries where most of these small-scale illegal miners come from. Now, the other thing is the illegality, and the department doesn't speak about that. The illegality happens when the mine is not properly closed. And just putting a concrete slab over the top of a shaft is not proper closure. You know, the Act is very, very, very specific about what proper closure means. It means restoring the environment more or less to what it was before you started mining. And this is simply not happening in South Africa at the moment. You know, so the other thing is all mines are supposed to have a mine closure plan. Besides that, they're all supposed to have social and labor plans. They're supposed to train their workers so that one day when they're retrenched, they've got other skills that are portable, that they can take to other sectors of the economy, and they don't find themselves unemployed and living in informal settlements on where the mine used to be. If you go along Main Reef Road in Johannesburg, everywhere where there used to be a mine, there's a massive informal settlement. And those people make their money by stripping the old mine. It looks like Ukraine. It looks like the cities in Ukraine that are bombed, the cities of the towns of Sallies, Stilfontein, parts of Welkom, Virginia, and so on. It is looking simply terrible because we haven't planned for an unsustainable activity, which is mining, which is not renewable. You can't plant gold buttons and then more gold will grow. You know, we have to accept that the minerals will come to an end. And when they come to an end, we need to diversify our economy so that these towns can remain sustainable beyond mining.
Mr. van Wyk, I'm going to jump in there, if you don't mind. I can hear you're incredibly passionate and knowledgeable on the subject. I want to pick your brain, if I may, a little bit more about the circumstances around illegal miners in South Africa. And you've touched a little bit on the illegality and the situation in Lesotho. Can you describe for us the circumstances of many of the the term zama-zamas does not often refer to the humanity of these people. Is it true that many of them are recruited from Lesotho under the guise of coming to work in South Africa for legitimate mining companies, and only when they get here are they put to work forcibly in an illegal capacity, and that their families never, know until they die, perhaps, that they have been illegal, miners?
Well, yes, I think that the 21 mine workers that died last year in Stilfontein in the Northwest Province, or just the year before, I think it was 2021, towards the end of the year, when the widows came to identify their husbands, they told the provincial government in the Northwest Province, but our husbands were recruited, and they thought that they were coming to work in legitimate mines. And very often we find in licensed mines, there are shadow operations of ghost workers that are happening there, where these guys go past security, down the skips, into the mine, and they stay underground for up to 3 months at a time. And they get paid wages. They get paid about 50% of what a unionized mine worker gets. And the people who are exploiting them, the subcontractors and labor brokers and so on that are exploiting them, are paying them 50% less than a normal worker. They don't have pension, they don't have medical aid, and they are, when there's an accident, everyone disowns them and say, well, they don't belong to us. They are here illegally. They are illegal miners. You see, it's like the drug trade. The more illegal it is, the more expensive the drug becomes. Now, with gold, it's the opposite way. The more illegal it is, the less you pay the Zama-Zama or the small-scale miner for his gold, because you threaten to expose him. This happened from the time of Kimberley in 1868. Where black workers were often exploited to take illicit diamonds out of workings, and then they were told that, if you don't sell us these diamonds at the price we demand, then we are going to expose you as being an illegal operator. So these guys are extremely vulnerable. The reason why these 31 workers went to their relatives went to the Lesotho government, it's because, or their co-workers went to the Lesotho government, is because they didn't want to expose themselves in South Africa as being undocumented in the country, and then they would be arrested. So they went all the way to Lesotho.
So that's also how the Lesotho Ministry of Foreign Affairs learned about them being underground before our own government and our own department did. Mr. van Wyk, if I can ask you one last question, because you're in the business of benchmarking and measuring how certain functions, and in this case mining, performs compared to perhaps overseas. When you look at the responsibility of mines and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to rehabilitate mines, as you said, to close mines effectively, to submit these closure plans to local government, how do we compare? You did say there's a lot wrong with what's currently happening, but how do we compare internationally? And how do we fix and it's a very broad, perhaps a moral question, but how do we fix that in terms of getting the will to want to fix it and to get those benchmarks and processes in place?
Well, I think first and foremost, we look at Canada and Australia, where mining started more or less the same time as South Africa. Both areas were also colonies of Britain, just like South Africa. But in those countries, they didn't have cheap labor. Because the global division of labor is unfortunately racially defined. But besides that, in Australia, the mining code in Australia requires that the mine is responsible for that mine for 100 years after closure. They can still be prosecuted. In the United States, the same thing. If you make a mess in the United States in a mine and you run away to South Africa or anywhere else in the world, they will find you and they will prosecute you. It's not like we don't know who the owners of these mines were. There's a deeds office in Pretoria that will tell us who owned these mines. But the more recent mines that have been abandoned, we know exactly who is abandoning them. And those people should be held accountable. We should not always look to find the voiceless to blame and to say, okay, let's prosecute the voiceless and the weak, whereas the big guys, the guys who abandon the mines, just simply walk away from their responsibility. But also with these mines, and to keep these towns alive, we can create concurrent and post-mining economics. The mines can produce gas, for example, methane. This mine is full of methane. We are giving licenses for fracking between Virginia and Machabeng and Welkom when in fact there are very ultra deep level shafts that are full of gas already, which we can use for gas extraction, for example. We can do other forms of energy generation in these
do
particular
apologise,
mines.
Mr. Van Wyk. I'm going to have to jump in there again. We have completely run out of time. I apologise. It's certainly a gripping subject that needs a lot more investigation. I'm going to almost guarantee you we'll be speaking to you again shortly to explore this issue in a little bit more depth. Thank you very much for your insights. That was lead researcher at the Benchmarks Foundation, David Van Wyk, giving us some more insights into the mining question, as 31 bodies found today, well, not found yet, brought to the surface yet, but we know that they are there in Welkom, and another 8 discovered in Germiston.